Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour. And today is Tuesday, November 25th, 2025. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's joining us here today, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeanie Ryce on the website at whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the two words that say Start Here in the upper left-hand corner, it will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Ryce's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of the book contains a narrative description and explanation of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet. And it's a tool I've been using to great effect for over 21 years now to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. You can also download the actual worksheet process itself. It's a simple PDF file. Click the link, download it, print it off, copy it as often as you'd like, and use it over and over again absolutely free. You can also download a whole host of audio files with shows just like this one, where people have been stepped through the worksheet process. And if you choose to listen to them even repeatedly, they can serve as a powerful tutorial for you to help you get maximum benefit from these tools in the shortest amount of time possible. You can also go to your App Store and type in the three words HeartLand Aramaic Forgiveness. And if you do that before you're done typing the word forgiveness, you'll see the glowing heart icon. If you tap on it, it will let you download a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet. It contains an abbreviated version of that worksheet process, and it contains a copy of the Dragon and Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. We hope people do all of that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives. Secondarily, because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. If you have anything else to share with us, please do so. You can email me at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org, or you can email Jeanie at jeanie@whyagain.org. It's whyagain.org. And or you can join us live most weekdays from 11 to noon Central Time. Go to zoom.us and tell them you want to join a meeting, and enter meeting ID number 853-2357-4173. That's 853-2357-4173. And as I like to mention, we appreciate whenever anybody does that, because it makes it so much easier for us to live into our intention with this work. So, please let us know how what we're doing is benefiting you. Yesterday I started to read a little bit from an Alan Watts book that, you know, the title's appropriate and the theme is timely, even though he wrote it back in 1951. The whole idea of sending well, I'm going to go down that path. Every generation thinks this is the worst. This is right now is the time. Be afraid, be very afraid, run around, scream, point fingers, blame, and it never changes. We're always in the middle of stuff. There's always stuff for us individually to learn and grow and do, and there's always stuff that our cultures can do and grow and move through. And yet the fear from all these great spiritual teachings, not the religious teachings. The religious teachings go into fear, but the spiritual teachings tell you fear is false. It is not useful. It is a distraction. It is at very best just a mild distraction, and at worst it's the mechanism that creates the vast majority of your suffering. So, if you understand that, what Alan Watts was trying to say in that book is the anxiety isn't useful either. The anxiety is self-created. So the fear and the anxiety and the blame, as tempting as they are, mostly because we have peer pressure, we have a lot of people around us, misery loves company, people who like to complain, like to be around people who like to listen to complaining. And that's not what we'd like to promote here. We'd like to promote here a level of personal accountability and observation that just keeps getting deeper, that just keeps going more and more towards radical honesty, radical inquiry. People talk about radical acceptance and radical inquiry, and what does it mean? Well, it means you just keep going deeper, that you're never quite satisfied with the observation. You want to stay in the observation mode so that you can have the direct experience of life and whatever's coming at you more fully in each moment. And there aren't going to be words that you can put on the lived experience, but you can have experiences that are deeper and richer if you're in the moment questioning and observing the moment, as opposed to being in the moment rehearsing your beliefs or trying to impose your beliefs about what's good and bad and right and wrong onto the flow of life in that moment. So the flow of life just wants you to just be with it. That's the best way for any of us to enrich and deepen our experience of life, is to be in the moment with the questioning phase, rather than being in a moment and mentally rehearsing what I believe to be the truth, or the way I think things should be, and comparing them constantly to what I observe as the way things are. So, comments, questions, answers. We welcome any suggested topic change. The book by Alan Watts that I was reading from yesterday is titled The Wisdom of Insecurity. And the point is, if the truth of life is that things are always changing, then it doesn't really fit with wisdom to try and pretend that this situation as it is going to last forever. So, I was with a person earlier today and talking about what's a process like for recovering after a person has spent years in a relationship pattern that's abusive. What's it going to take for somebody to recover, to heal, to get more feeling solid and grounded in themselves, to be able to trust their own perception when they're coming out of many years of having lived in a relationship pattern where they were told that they're high maintenance, they're a problem, their perceptions are all wrong, They hear things that nobody ever said. They see things that never happened. What's a healing process like for that? And in a departure from what some others like Dr. Michael Ryce might say, one of the things that I was trying to point out to her is that she's not likely to be able to heal this pattern fully as long as she's still in the middle of the pattern. In other words, as long as she's being subjected to demands and requests and interactions with a person who is constantly trying to tell her that her perceptions are off the mark and that she's a problem and that she is unreasonable and her desires or her expectations are unreasonable. And so as long as she's in that and getting inundated with those statements and requests, she's not likely to get that much stronger. She's not likely to be able to see what she needs to change so that she can eventually be available for a healthy relationship pattern with somebody else. I used to talk to people about if you had a relationship with somebody and they were alcoholic, and then you get out of that relationship after 5 or 7 or 15 years, it doesn't really matter, but 5 years at least. And then you get out of that relationship, and then you want to dive into another relationship, and my advice is, why don't you spend some time unraveling the changes that developed in your life over the 5 or 7 years that you were in this pattern with this other person. And they frequently push back and say, well, I'm not the one who had the alcohol problem. I wasn't the sick one in the relationship. I X, Y, and Z. Here are the reasons why I don't need to do any work. And when I have somebody push back like that, I have to say, okay, good luck. I can't really help you in therapy, though. Because if you push back and push back, I finally said to him, look, just imagine that you were in a relationship with this person that you loved dearly and it went beautifully, and you were in it for 7 years, or you were married to them for 7 years, and you knew them for several years before that. But what happened was, not too long after you got married, they became a paraplegic, and they were stuck in a wheelchair. And you stayed with them, and you had a wonderful relationship, but what you had to do, what you learned to do, and what this other person was willing to accept from you was a level of care and control that's not going to fit so well if you're in a relationship with somebody who is completely physically able. You're likely to try and do things for your next person that they don't need to have done for them because you're just so programmed into it from your previous relationship. That it doesn't mean that you had a problem or you were diseased or you had an illness and that's why you were helping this person get from room to room or reach something off of a tall shelf or cut their meat for them or whatever. It's not because you're a bad person that you did any of those things. You did it in the flow of the relationship and it made sense there. However, that's a set of old habits that you're going to have to disconnect from. It's going to be hard for you to be in a relationship with somebody who's completely able-bodied and they don't need you to do X, Y, and Z thing for them that you used to do. Even in a situation like that, there are adjustments to be made. And there are deeper and more insidious adjustments to be made if you were in a relationship pattern with somebody that was emotionally, mentally abusive, if it wasn't, on top of that, even if it wasn't physically abusive. So here's hoping that you can identify what you might need to change and own what you might need to change within yourself to get healthier and stronger. and especially giving yourself permission to leave abusive patterns and or the interaction with people in relationship when you've tried everything you know how and you can't end the abusive pattern. Right? Just keep the focus on what you have control over. And if you've tried ending an abusive pattern and you can't get the other person to meet you in this healthy, respectful, open communication way, then my advice would have to be, please leave. Please leave, and please continue your work on yourself to make sure that when you have something that's less than love that comes up in you, you address it directly with the use of tools. You don't try and figure it out. You don't try and talk your way out of it. You apply tools. And that's what we're offering here. So, how can we support you today? We've got probably 40 minutes left. And we have all kinds of good stuff to talk about. I've had a couple people in the past couple weeks that have gotten back to me with very nice feedback about the book Positive Intelligence by Shirzad Shamin. And that book, the subtitle is Why Only 20% of Teams and Individuals Reach Their True Potential. And I love the overlap. I love the synchronicity of how for at least a couple decades now, we've been talking about EFT tapping and breath work. And combining that with simple questions like, gee, how am I creating this emotion? Or, gee, what am I making this situation mean that has my mind saying this emotion of anger or fear or rage is appropriate here? Just that much is basically the essence of what Shirzad Shamin says we need to do to increase our connection to that part of our brain that can tap into wisdom. Slow things down, bring the focus inside yourself, be consciously awake and aware in the moment. And what you're doing is waking up and strengthening the part of your brain that can tap into insight, intuition, inspiration, wisdom, etc. He likes to encourage people to give a name to their saboteurs, those negative thought patterns within them that can come up, and that they can group them and say, well, all of these kinds of thoughts come from my judge, and all of these kinds of thoughts come from my diva self, and all of these types of thoughts come from my younger, wounded, insecure self. He encourages people to give them a personality or a name or a description so that you can really more easily identify the thoughts that are associated with that label or pattern within you, so you can see more quickly how they're false. And so you can withdraw the attention you would pour into them, or the identification you would pour into those thoughts, which is a necessary part of creating a negative emotional state. You've got to really pour your mind energy into it to generate what we call an emotion. Because you can have basically any thought and chuckle at it, and it doesn't generate emotion just to have a thought move through your awareness. It does create an emotion when you pour mind energy into it, or you convince yourself that a particular thought is very true, or it's very real, or it's very important. And the more you pour your mind energy into that thought and interpretation about that particular set of thoughts, the stronger the impact it's going to have in your life. Whether it motivates you to act or not, whether it motivates you to speak or act or not, it has had an impact on your life. It's generated that emotional state. So, how can we support you today? What's on your mind? How have these ideas about your creating your life experience, how are they landing for you? Kathy, I noticed you're unmuted. Was that intentional? Do you have a comment? No. Okay. She's back to mute. So, I had a call this morning with Suzanne Roberts, and we're discussing the potential for having an event, and she has given me permission to share her documentary. Her documentary, the same title as the book that she wrote, which is titled It's Deeper Than That. And it's a documentary about what she's done over the years with her work with polarity, and how she's polarity therapy, and how she's brought it into working for herself. And now she brings that into her work with corporations and groups, and how she's planning to create what she's calling a documentary salon. So it's a gathering of people that get together in person, and then they watch the documentary, and then Suzanne leads them through or facilitates an experience that she's calling the Great Reconnection, which is to let people have this experience of their own wireless energy source within their physical body, and have them have that experience in the group, so that people can feel a group experience of intensity, tapping into the awareness at a felt sense level of this energy field that gives rise to us and sustains us. It feeds and fuels our bodies and our consciousness, and that's a big part of her work, is to help people tap into this awareness. And then they can bring up this awareness. It's very much like what Dr. Michael Ryce calls this total, perfect, conscious, active, present love, right? The awareness of the fact that here's a creative force that gave rise to me, and I'm still tied into it, and it's inseparable from my experience and my existence. The similarities between the way Suzanne Roberts talks about polarity and polarity therapy, and the idea that every energy system has to have a positive pole, a negative pole, and a neutral ground, much like a battery. And here's what we have in our human physiology, and you might think of the soul as a positive pole, and the body as a negative pole, and the mind as the neutral ground, or at least intended to be a neutral ground. And what happens if you look at these different observations that Suzanne Roberts has made, and the tremendous similarities between the observations that Dr. Michael Ryce has made, both from his work with the Kapoor's manuscript and the Course in Miracles, you start to wonder, wait a minute, why are people having to use different words if they're all talking about the same thing? Well, because none of these words can hold, contain, or describe the thing that they're trying to make reference to. The word is not the thing. And so it's a blessing, really, to have all these different people talking about it from their slightly different perspectives, especially if you wake up and realize that they're all talking about the same thing. So if you're listening to all of these different words, but they're all referencing the same thing, you might get ushered into an experience that you wouldn't get if you just had one way of talking about it or thinking about it. So, welcome to all of you who are listening, and we're wide open. We have plenty of time. We've got about a half an hour left for comments, questions, things you would like to see us discuss. It's a Tuesday, so there will be a support group tonight. It'll be the only support group this week because Thursday is the holiday of Thanksgiving, so there will not be a support group that day. And probably not an internet show that day based on how that day is unfolding for me, the way it looks like it's going to be unfolding. So, perfect time to get your comments or questions in. I had looked in the past, I started reading a bit from the book by Brent Baum, where he talks about healing. The title of the book is Healing Dimensions, The Healing Dimensions. And it's about resolving trauma in the body, mind, and spirit. And back in 1997, he wrote the intro here, and it's about how trauma, in his opinion, and from his research, is best described as a spontaneous state of self-hypnosis. He says it's an altered state of consciousness which encodes state-bound problems and symptoms. In other words, in that moment, these are the same words. These are words to describe the same thing that Dr. Ryce says happens when the power person dynamic gets downloaded. All the data, all the impressions, all the interpretations, all the sights, sounds, smells, physical sensations of the moment get downloaded or encoded into the individual who in that moment enters a state of altered awareness. You might call it self-hypnosis. And he writes that this hypnosis occurs spontaneously at times of stress, and it serves the functional purpose of containing the experience so that it prevents the person from becoming overwhelmed. Psychological shocks and traumatic events are psychoneurophysiological dissociation. So in other words, people cut off their awareness of these experiences at the psychological, at the neurological, and other physiological levels. It is this faster than a heartbeat mechanism that kicks in as a protection when some part of the individual has decided this is too much for me to deal with. He writes, the encoding of the trauma in the nerve cells of the body is facilitated by the limbic hypothalamic pituitary system. And it exercises a profound influence on the functioning of the autonomic nervous system and the endocrine system and the immune system. At the moment of traumatization, all sensory perceptions are, quote, paused, close quotes, and they're stored holographically at what he calls 1 millisecond prior to the worst part of the event, T-1. So we've talked about this before. If I remember everything but the worst part, then I'll be in a loop remembering everything but the worst part. And resolution needs to assist me in understanding that I've already survived the worst part, and I don't need to be caught up in a loop, racing right up to it, and then facing the conclusion that it's too much for me and then shutting everything down. I don't need to shut it down and walk away from it. I've already lived through it. But because the event has been encoded in a holographic manner and stored in the nerve cells, it's often stored in the place where the pain first became overwhelming. And when you're focusing on such memory fragments, it provides access to the stored memory because every fragment of a holographic scene contains the whole. So what he's putting forth here is the idea that this holographic nature of our perception forms this foundation for this self-hypnosis process, and that allows us to provide a containment for things we believe would be too overwhelming. We couldn't control the external circumstances at the time which had led to this event, but we can control what we do with it inside. And so we download some kind of a situation that every time it gets triggered, it just repeats on loop, but it doesn't contain the absolute worst part of it. He writes, a trauma is a moment when we realize that our creative resources of mind and our ability to pause our space-time perceptions are a dynamic of the psyche it's intended to be helpful. The resolution of our traumas, therefore, requires that we address these powerful, encoded moments and these powerful states of consciousness. So, if you take this and combine it with the book Positive Psychology, you say, okay, so here's a person who has basically been trained to just listen to the noise or the sound of his own or her own internal negative dialogue, negative thoughts about self, things to be afraid of, etc. And those are energies and belief patterns, thought patterns that have been encoded into their body's energy system, and every time they get resonated into activity, they come up fresh and new, and it seems like, oh gee, here's a thought, and my thoughts are important and they're valid, so I better believe this thought, and now I'm off to the races of generating fear or anger or upset. Whereas I can recognize if I slow down, wait a minute, there's a bottom line observation that says if I have a negative thought about myself or somebody else, or a negative emotion experienced in my system, I can instantly know it's not true. Boy, what a relief. Just try to imagine this. Try to imagine that you practice this thought pattern enough that you wake up one day and you start having a negative thought and you laugh or chuckle at it and feel a relief. In the moment you have the negative thought and the negative emotion comes up, you recognize you've practiced this observation that if you have a negative thought about yourself or somebody else, or a negative emotion active in your mind, you can instantly know that it's false. You can instantly know that it's an old tape playing from the past. It's not about what's going on in the present moment. I'm going to invite you to just imagine what it would be like that if 6 months or a year from now, after you'd practiced every day to catch every negative thought and chuckle at it because you've observed it over time, it's false, that you wake up, you just visualize right now that some point in time in the next 6 months to a year, you're going to wake up and have a negative thought come to your mind and instantly laugh out loud because you realize how quickly you caught it, saw it as negative, and let it fly by without generating a negative emotion. And it will just, you'll sit there in the delight for a moment and then move on with your day. Visualize right now what that might be like. Visualize right now what your life would be like if you instantly knew that each negative thought was false. Imagine what your life is like when you don't follow those negative thoughts down their respective rabbit holes. Just try to visualize your life being okay with whatever thoughts arise, even if they generate a negative emotional state, because your perspective is at the moment that negative emotional state is experienced by you, you take a breath and turn the focus inside and you inquire gently within yourself, gee, I wonder how I'm creating this negative emotion. And if that provides a shift, great. If not, shift to the next question, which is, I wonder what I'm making this present moment situation mean that seems so logically to lead to this negative emotional state. Because it's false. And just breathe and soften. And just try to imagine what your life would be like if every single negative thought you had was instantly recognized as false and released. I'm just here to tell you there aren't really any words for that. I have tried for a good number of years now to try and help people understand with words I might speak how much better my experience of life has gotten since I've been actively applying these tools. And this is, I'm pretty much stuck here. The closest I've gotten to it is to just say, I can honestly tell you that as I'm living my life today, including having a fall and having physical pain and, having financial expenses I wasn't counting on, having people no-show for appointments, having, angry responses to things that I thought might be, getting a gratitude response. That as I look at that, even though all these things are still happening the way they were 20, 25, 30 years ago, because I've been practicing the use of these tools, I spend the tiniest fraction of time in my life today in those negative emotional states. I'm amazed at how easily I laugh at things today that used to trigger some kind of a swear word or a tight, tense exclamation or, a pounded fist or a pouting response on my part. I'm amazed at how often these days I move through situations like that used to prompt me into a behavior pattern or a thought pattern that would lead to anger and upset. And these days, it leads to a chuckle. So that's the one thing I tell people, trying to help them understand how their own life might change if they were to apply these tools consistently, persistently over time, as Michael Ryce likes to say.
Tim?
Yes.
Backing way up, because this is so interesting. Backing way up, I thought you were bringing in this whole tool use of this kind of recognizing that it's not true instantly to how we go into a state of shock. Let's say you have, the only thing I can think of in my own life is a pretty mild example, but I slipped on ice, broke my wrist, and immediately I knew I'd broken my wrist, and the dog was off the leash and running around. I had to get the dog. I was all business. I was not feeling any pain in the wrist. So right there, something happened in my system to shut down the pain that I was going to feel later when things had calmed down. I was all business, very efficient, got the dog, walked home, got my daughter-in-law, and so on from there. So I thought you were talking at first about a mechanism where in the moment when it would hurt the most, we dissociate or disassociate, and I don't know the difference between those two, even though I've been told it. But now you're going into a way of kind of stepping away from what would be extremely painful or a calling up of a trauma. And you're not even going near it because you already know it's false. If you've been through it before, it's not going to hurt you now. And anything now, you can step away from it before it hurts. But I'm not connecting the two things.
Okay, well, so one of them is, like, in the moment, just a regular life event happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I instantly feel something come up in me. It's not really necessarily a trauma that happened just now.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to feel irritated or, oh, I'm so disappointed. I thought when Susan Bingham first unmuted, I thought she was going to go off to the right, but she went off to the left. I mean, so in the moment that I generate that emotion of disappointment, I can take a breath, turn the focus inside, and ask myself, how am I generating this? Mm-hmm. Or what am I making this situation mean, right? Mm-hmm. There's this other thing that happens that because of whatever the dynamic is, a sense within me that I'm not strong enough, I label something about my life interaction as too much, and I instantly shut it off, shut it down. And I'm not doing it consciously. This is an automatic mechanism. And somewhere down the road, I'll learn, oh, wow, that was pretty traumatic. I keep remembering this. Every time I remember this, I feel my heart palpitating and it's hard to breathe and I feel like I want to run away. Now I realize that when that event happened, I downloaded trauma. I went into that altered state that Brent Baum talks about as self-hypnosis, and I downloaded all these energies. Now, as I'm recognizing that and I want to work at dismantling it, I can use some of these tools, but I can also remember as part of the tool kit that every negative thought I have is false. And I can go back and recognize, oh, there's a part of me that feels locked in this memory of being 12 years old when this trauma happened. Even though I'm, 50 years or 60 years past that right now, I still feel like the 12-year-old. And I can use the recognition of the breath work and the goal canceling and the EFT tapping to help my 12-year-old self remember that those negative thoughts were false too. So we're kind of bridging the gap by sharing the perspective that the adult has about how these are protective coping mechanisms that I'm witnessing in my behavior, not signs of a disease process that needs to be medicated.
So you're basically saying that nothing from now on in my life is ever going to hurt me where it really matters. I'm always going to be okay, no matter what happens.
The core of you, your essence, is always going to be okay, has always been okay, will always be okay.
Okay.
And that when I want things to go or be different than they are, it's because I'm using a tiny, tiny little bit of information to create a fantasy, and that's not useful.
Yeah, I can understand that part.
So when I cancel the goals and ask to be shown a different way to understand what's going on, I open infinite possibilities. And we want to continue to increase those options and possibilities for people.
So this is a way of consciously correcting something where in our physical setup, like falling down, breaking a wrist, and then suddenly you're in a different state so you can cope. These are two different things in a way. Sorry, I don't know why I need to go there. Maybe don't need to, but.
So what are the two different things?
Something.
The shock that happens when you have a physical injury?
Yeah.
That's different than what?
Than what you're doing now, of just knowing that you're okay and that nothing can knock that okayness away from you anymore. And if you need to use a tool that you initiate through your own thinking and past experience using a tool, so be it, but you have it there and everything's going to be all right from here. It's not a physical thing at all. It's
learning a programming and unlearning it.
Right.
I mean, think about it. Everything you know about how to respond when you or somebody else you know gets hurt. They fall down and scrape their knee, or, they get hit with a baseball that was thrown the wrong way or whatever. Everything you know about how to respond to that has been learned and programmed by watching people throughout your life and how they respond.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a flash of a memory of a time when I was at my cousin's house, and he was probably in his early 40s, maybe late 30s, and he had a son who was maybe 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And the son had fallen and scraped his knee, and my cousin's mother, my aunt, ran over and picked the boy up and, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And he stepped in, literally pried his son away from his mother and said, "You're okay. Where does it hurt?" "Okay, that's okay." Literally changing the whole thing. I'm not going to let my mom program you into being whatever he thought, that what would have happened to him if somebody comforted him as he was crying. Instead, he did the full force, "You're a man, you can handle this, we don't need to cry about this," kind of. His training about how to respond when someone's in pain or has sadness or whatever is going to be very different than somebody who was raised with physical comfort and gentleness, and it's all programmed into us. But what we haven't awakened to yet is that we can reprogram it. I mean, here's the kind of thing that sometimes people say, "Oh my God, you could keep working at this and work. It's work. I got news for you. Dr. Michael Ryce has this thing in the back of his book where he talks about what it's like to have tools and not have tools, and what life is like without tools. Remember him reading that?
No.
It's hard work to do your work, but it's also hard work to go through life without tools to feel like you're buffeted around by events and other people's actions that are controlling your emotions. It's a nightmare in that way. Oh, I thought I had his book here that I could just lay my hands on and read that, because he's got a part of that. Like, I think it's at the end of his book where he writes, what life is like with tools and life is like without tools.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah.
And yet, my life is so much better. I prefer this experience so much more than the life experience I had 22 or 24 years ago, before I'd encountered this work and found how well it dovetailed with what I'd been teaching people in therapy for 30 years already. And then I decided, I want to really apply this every day, every moment of every day in my life. Well, there aren't any ways to describe how much better my life is since doing that. And yet, it wouldn't happen unless I put in the effort. So the good news is things can change dramatically. The not so good news is I have to put in the effort to get these things to change.
So the connection between using the tools and living in this new way of thinking and approaching what might be very traumatic is very different than the body's automatically going into shock so that a person can function when they otherwise might not. It's an analogy, but it isn't similar really. I mean, it isn't the same.
Well, and also I think it's very important to recognize that the body goes into shock because the mind tells it to. Right? It goes into shock on its own because of, real reasons and real limits to how much stimulation the body can take.
Mm-hmm.
And it also generates that response because it's been trained to, because thoughts come up and say, this is too much.
Oh, that's interesting. I thought it was pre-thoughts altogether. It was just automatically, suddenly I was handed, oh, I'm just not feeling this right now, so I can go about my business, and I'll feel all this later.
Well, Bruce Lipton figured it out. He saw it happen through the electron microscope. He saw that every cell in the human body has receptor sites for what they call histogen-specific antigens. In other words, these ways that the individual cells in your body can get signals from your mind energy. And what he learned is that whatever signal comes in from the mind energy overrides the other data points. So the cell can be there in complete clean water, healthy food, clean air to breathe, plenty of rest, but the mind can be going, oh my God, did you believe what happened? Oh my God, did you see who got elected? Oh my God, did you see what happened to the stock market? Oh my, and so that body goes into the shock as though it's being attacked, even though there's no physical attack. Because it's responding to the mind saying, run away, panic, etc. So we can train ourselves into these trauma states or shock response patterns, and if we can train ourselves into them, we can train ourselves out of them. That's the point.
So this is really pushing it now, but so if I hadn't already had the idea in my mind that some things are going to be too hard to handle, I might have busted my wrist and really felt how much it hurt, because my mind didn't shut it down, because it didn't have any pre-recorded ideas about how much pain a body can stand. And no, I'm just, how can we know these things? It was so instantaneous, but you're saying it's pre-programmed that way.
Well, it's learned. Some of it is pre-programmed. It's like an automatic, like a reflex response. If you put your hand against something that's really hot, as soon as it registers, the reflex pulls it away. It's also that we learn what we think we should be able to handle or could handle. And with training, why do you think they have so much training for people in the military advanced programs? Green Beret and Rangers, and why do you think they have so much training for those people? Because when they train them and they train their mind to tolerate different situations, then they tolerate them differently. Now, there are people who've been trained to go into situations that would instantaneously create, panic and fight or flight in another human being, and they've been trained to stay calm. Why? Because you can. Well, in that same way, we've been trained into believing or thinking what we believe about what we can or can't tolerate. And we learned that from our parents and watching our parents go through things, and our friends and our media that we consume. It's literally training us into what we believe, which is why the Way of Mastery talks about the intellect as being shoved full of trivialities. And it's the same thing that Dr. Michael Ryce talks about as the 9-bit mind. It's not your intelligence. It's not your soul, it's just this, what Guy Finley calls the mechanical level of mind, and Michael Ryce calls the 9-bit mind, and what the Way of Mastery calls the intellect. It's an auto loop of recording what's printed onto it and then playing it back when it's called up. Well, you can learn how to interpret those things that you downloaded onto your hard drive and that you call back up when it's resonated. You can learn to interpret them differently. This is why the Diedrich Wolzak worksheet is so powerful. You go back and you reprogram yourself to make a different meaning around events you've experienced in your past. And he has you go back, and once you remember, oh, this is like the energy of emotion I had when I was 5 years old. What was going on when you were 5 years old? Oh, I flashed on it right away. This is when my best friend pushed me into a mud puddle and said he never liked me. And we've been friends my whole life. I'm 5 years old, right? And so there's the memory. And now what? Well, I pay attention. What did I download around that? At that point in time, I thought, I can't ever survive this. And I thought, this must mean I'm a horrible person. All right, what if I go back and interview my 5-year-old self and I learn that I downloaded this belief that I'm a horrible, unlovable person and that it's all my fault that the best friend moved away or pushed me down and said he doesn't like me anymore. And I just work with my 5-year-old self and get my 5-year-old self to see the false nature of that belief. Right? Just literally see the false nature of the belief and breathe and soften into it. And then I get my adult self to recognize, oh, you know what? You poured a lot of mind energy into this false belief, and those false beliefs are all negative. And now I'm in the process of dismantling the programming, as the Course in Miracles would say. I go back to the origin of the error in thought, where I believed that there was something wrong with me that made my best friend push me down. And I breathe and soften into the truth, which is, you know what? The Creator put the breath of life in me. I have value. I have value that goes beyond words. And this is going to work out in ways I can't even begin to imagine. And I breathe and soften, and I enter onto that healing journey, or into that healing journey. Anyway, I hope that's somewhat useful. I know there's a lot of deep levels in the question you're asking, but...
Oh, thanks.
All right, well, I'll just remind everybody that that's the end of our time. Susan Fluak was trying to join, but I'll just close out by reminding us that we come from love. We're made of the stuff we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false. And every single time I thought things did not work out the way they should, each and every time they've worked out far better than I ever thought.